as we come closer and closer to the Yamim Noraim, give you something of an extended inner life analogy to what's happening in our Parsha, and then maybe bring up a few cases of people struggling with the shadow. So first of all, what do we mean by the shadow? In general, from a Jungian perspective, there are forces in our inner lives that we push into the shadow because we don't want it, we don't want, and I don't think nor could we tolerate, a day-to-day consciousness that is aware of the things that we have done that we deeply regret. Sometimes really hurtful and, among some people, even truly despicable behavior. They don't want that to be part of their day-to-day sense of self, so it's pushed out of consciousness. It doesn't mean it's gone. I'll give the analogy of anybody in a 12-step program. People say, I'm a sober addict, meaning the addiction isn't gone, which is why they never taste alcohol, take drugs again, in the fear that if they taste the alcohol or drugs again, they'll go on a binge. So the addiction is down inside the shadow, but part of what it means to be in a 12-step program is you never forget that the addiction is in the shadow, and that's why you go to meetings. And in that culture, when you stop going to meetings, the shadow just gets stronger. As Israel Suchman has reminded us many times, while you're living your life is doing push-ups in the dark, getting ready to ambush you at the moment when you are at your weakest. So what for us, those of us who are not, let's say, drug and alcohol addicts, although we all are susceptible to the forces in the shadow. So we have to have our own, as it were, meeting. And our own meeting is the contemplative practice that I talked about a few weeks ago in my extended meditation on truth. One meaning of truth is knowing the truth about yourself. And therefore, you might say a proactive, maybe a few times a week, confronting your shadow. And one way we do this is we manage negative ego states and try to strengthen positive ego states. And some days it's not very comfortable when you go down into the ego states you don't want to remember. Then you go down to how we've pushed parts of it in the shadow. And if we pull it out of the shadow just for a few moments of observation, the power of the Yetzer Hara, of the shape of the destructive forces in our shadow is weakened when we can see it. A quip I've often used, if you can see it, you don't have to be it. You can see it, you don't have to be it. If you can see it, you can see it coming. So our Torah portion is because when you go to war against your enemy, as you know, most of my wisdom works from my experience as a counselor and clergy person is about what happens in our close relationships, in families, life partnerships, and so forth. And oftentimes I will say to a person, let's say in a counseling session where people free in counseling, you get to say what you want. And they're surprised when I say, no, not in front of me. You can't say what you want. You say you speak with wisdom. And we're going to use our hour to train in wisdom, not unleash horrible, horrible feelings. So sometimes I've had a person speak about their spouse in front of them, and I would just take a breath and I say, I want you to imagine that you're speaking to someone whom you love. Because many times in interpersonal relationships, it's ki tetzei lemilchama al oyevecha. Who becomes the oyev? The oyev is sometimes the spouse, the life partner, the child, the parent, somebody else. And I'm going to reverse the image of speak to others as you would speak to at home. I'm going to reverse that. Speak to others as you speak to people when you're in public. Because many people save their well-cultivated persona for the public, but when they come home, safe behind walls and curtains, and in relationships that are not as easily disposable, as a work relationship, people feel that they can unleash. I'm saying from my experience with years and years of counseling, people feel that they can unleash because for the person to estrange and walk out and cut off, it's a much higher bar than just to stop talking to somebody at work because they spoke to you in a harsh way. So many people feel permission to treat the people in their close relationships as an oyev. And of course, I've sadly seen this between spouses, parents and children, children and parents, family gatherings when they're, this is the classic danger of Passover, of families come apart at family gatherings where repressed forces come out and someone says something and the family is just is cleaved from that moment on. So the first thing is, and this takes a lot of inner regulation, when you train yourself to be aware that there's something inside of you saying, this person's the enemy, we all know what comes next. Don't talk. It's one of the core foundations of what I call the wall of virtue. Training to feel the force coming from the shadow. It takes some work, but you go back to past events. You try to remember what it felt like. I feel it coming up from within through my chest and into my face. And that's my signal. Don't talk. So if you ever go back to a moment where you knew you lost it, where you knew you said harsh things, you train yourself to recognize that feeling because it comes up in a fraction of a second. But neurologically, a fraction of a second is geological time. If you train yourself, you can feel it and you can head it off. It feels instantaneous. But if you train yourself to manage your thoughts, you can even get ahead of a thought. It's an amazing moment of freedom where you can actually get ahead of a thought before as a thought becomes a feeling and tries to translate it into words, you can actually get ahead of it. So when you have that feeling that something has been unleashed from the shadow and is working its way up from thoughts and feelings into speech and behavior, don't talk, you intervene. Now, what I'm giving you is a rough analogy, not a word by word analysis, but the next part of the portion is when you go out to war and you see a captive woman whom you want, and she's a beautiful woman. The Torah goes on, to describe all the process before you marry her. We're going to put that aside for a moment. The next part is if a man has a woman that he loves and an isha snua. Well, the inner life tradition says the captive woman, a hated woman, that the captive woman has now become an isha snua. I mean, he didn't take her as a wife after knowing someone from the village and having a matchmaker involved. He was able to control his lust on the battlefield because it's part of the rules of war in the Israelite army still today. But after consideration, you might say the first wife, the wife of the estate of the children, it truly is lifelong love, and the second one becomes the so-called isha snua, and they say you can't treat her any differently. Now I'm going to translate this to an inner life perspective. Sometimes the people whom we love, we have an ish sanui or an isha snua. The people whom we partner with become hated. And the words that people say, the thoughts that people have when they feel unloved, unseen, disappointed, unheard, not respected, it brings up some of the most primal feelings of being offended, devalued, marginalized in the eyes of somebody else that for many people are just absolutely intolerable emotions. In the wisdom works, I've had entire mini semesters on the idea of shame, which is the most difficult inner wound to manage. It produces so much destructive behavior, both at the individual, social, psychological, and even, I think, international level. We could look at very sad events in history, including current, where an entire nation felt shame, and they can't discharge their shame until they destroy their enemy. And often, I think war, especially here in the Middle East, the wars against Israel, are often wars to overcome shame, which is, the incredible exaltation. Let's make sure our mics are off. That people felt when they murdered, captured, butchered Jews and took them hostage. People felt they were exulting. Well, why? They overcame the shame of having been defeated in wars that they began so many times. It's a very deep impulse to overcome shame. So what happens when you feel shamed? Again, people say, I feel unseen, unheard, devalued, dismissed, disrespected. And people oftentimes who are known as being very nice people, they become volcanic in the way that they talk. Now, that volcano is in the shadow. And as sometimes I've counseled people that, I will officially categorize as nice, oftentimes therapists, who truly are nice, compassionate people and know how to regulate and work in healing others with great compassion. They got pushed over a line. The volcano came out and they say to me, I'm so ashamed of myself. I know so much better. And my response is, we, everybody who knows you knows that. You are known as a nice, compassionate, empathetic, safe person. But one thing you didn't know, again, I'm compressing an hour of counseling into less than a minute here. One thing you didn't know is the power of your shadow. Many people who see themselves as a nice person don't want to admit there's a monster within me. I've told this anecdote many times. When I was learning all this, when I was in rabbinical school, I had a close friend who was a student of James Hillman, who was the senior student of Carl Jung. And he introduced me to the work of James Hillman, whom I recommend for everybody. His book, um, Revisioning Psychology, difficult book, but a highly worthwhile book, and a book that he wrote in the 60s, a compilation of his lectures to Protestant clergy called In Search, as opposed to Research, In Search. He was telling Protestant clergy, when this was in non-evangelical clergy, they had moved to the social action movement. And what Hillman claimed is, you've stranded your congregants who know how to act morally in society, but they've lost touch with the dynamics and tragic dynamics of the inner life. So Hillman was saying, let social action and let all that happen at the policy dimension. You can refer people on how to become educated of the ills of society. He says you have people once a week, and there's nowhere else to go that will help them reach in and not destroy themselves and your families. Reading Hillman when I was a young rabbinical student really changed the direction of my rabbinate. I was going to be a Talmud scholar and all kinds of things, and I read Hillman's book, and I began only speaking about the inner life, and in many ways, Oratora was founded on that commitment. So Hillman, in his book In Search, he talks about the inner life, and when we have our signposts coming out from the fog of a city, we can see the signposts, but we don't have the map. And down inside the fog of the city, there is the underbelly of society. There is a place of violence and drug addiction. Well, those signposts are coming out, but we don't want to read those signposts. We want to read the signposts that take us to the beach or the country club or the park or something. And so if you don't do that inner work because you are officially a nice person, and many of you are, there's a volcano in there. Now, the next of these, the captive woman, the Isha Snua, the hated wife, the next comes the Ben Sorer Umoreh, the stubborn and rebellious son. And what the Talmud says is the stubborn and rebellious sons comes from a marriage characterized by hatred. Now, I don't believe that to be true. There are sometimes people with perfectly good marriages, and the child comes out to be an addict or a bad person. And I think a lot of it is genetics, some forgotten grandparent, aunt, or uncle that the family stopped talking to, and suddenly genetically popped up in your family. By the way, I want to share with you, I was counseling a couple whose son had, as it were, gone bad, and the parents could not figure out what happened, what they had done wrong. And I said, is there anybody in your family that acts like your son? And he says, yeah, my brother. I stopped talking to him 30 years ago. Now that you mention it, my son is a lot like my brother. I said, well, that might explain it, because I think a lot of our personalities are genetics driven. I said, however, no matter what a person's genetics are, there are things we can do if we parent with wisdom and parent the soul of the child that can help the child deal with uh, personality drives that are destructive. And as I've said many times, the greatest gift you can give your child is the gift of insight, knowing what's happening within them. So now it's all gone bad. You know, a relationship in which there's hatred, where hateful words are said, a child with a tendency toward this is witnessing this, internalizing all of this, and they say it's a ben sorer umore, a stubborn and rebellious or destructive child. And then it goes on to tell us what that destructiveness is, and will not obey the mother, will not obey the father. He's a glutton and a drunkard, and you know every bad thing. This, by the way, is a 13 and a half year old, according to the rabbinic tradition. And they take him to the elders of the city. And in the Mishnah, it says the elders warn him. And then they, you know, in those days, you didn't go to jail. You got whipped 3 times and says, like, this is serious. You better stop. And that was the warning before execution. So there's a horrible thing in our Torah portion that says they take him to the elders of the city. They take him out and they stone this Ben Sorer Umore to death. Um, Now, I want to take this in a little bit of a strange direction and then come back. This, when the rabbis of the Talmud read this, they encountered what I'll call the shadow in the Torah. And that's when people say, oh, just study Torah will make you a better person. Yeah, like when your teenager makes you upset, kill him, right? So that's, I said, that's actually the shadow of the Torah. And sometimes when a person says, study Torah, I said, you mean that? They go, yeah, that's a good point. No, go to the rabbinic drop. So what is the rabbinic midrash? I was studying this recently. It's in Tractate Sanhedrin, eighth chapter, if I'm not mistaken, around page 70 and subsequent. So the Talmud comes along and says, well, how much is a glutton? You know, an entire side of beef. How much is a drunkard? A case of wine in one sitting. So they make it almost impossible. They say, well, and he has to be at somebody else's table, because if he were at his father's table, he wouldn't do it. So he's hanging out with bad company, implying that he's been encouraged to do this. And then they say, since it says the voice of the mother and the voice of the father, the parents have to have exactly the same tenor and tone of voice. And since it says the voice of the mother and the father, implying they're somehow similar, they must look exactly alike. They must be the same height and have similar appearances. And so what the rabbis do is they legislate this shadow moment of the Torah out of existence. Now, so many of the laws that people read in the Bible, they say, this is horrible, this is outrageous, this is cruel. How could I ever be in such a religion? Because I don't want people to be turned off to religion. I want to help them get back to the beauty is in the religion, not just the shadow side. To realize that the rabbis wanted to get rid of it. So they legislated it out of existence. And they basically say, Ben Sorer Umore, the law of the stubborn and rebellious son, when was it ever effected? They say, Lo haya velo atid lihiyot. Never was and never will be. Which is disturbing on another side, because a person would say, well, if it never was and never will be, what's it doing in the Torah? So one guy says, I actually sat on the grave of one of them. Right. And it's kind of hilarious. He's not going to say I met one. He says, well, they did it once and there was a gravestone, so that's evidence. Because they can't say that a Torah law never, was never applicable. Now, I want to bring this out to you. I've heard parents talk about their children as if the child is a ben sorer umoreh. And it's, it's chilling for me. So I want to give you a case I've talked about a few times because it's a paradigmatic case. In fact, you find it in Eric Berne's book, Games People Play, which is a wonderful book. He wrote an excellent book on ego states, managing ego states, which didn't go anywhere. He had to sell out of his trunk of his car, and people didn't buy it. So he wrote Games People Play, which was a very entertaining approach that we are who we are because of the nature of our interpersonal interactions. If you change the interpersonal interaction, you've changed. He used to be a psychoanalyst. He stopped and he worked on people changing their interpersonal reactions, along with Wittgenstein, so-called language games, not games that they're not serious, but meaning that it's ritualized behavior that's filled with payoffs. So there's a game that Byrne talks about, and I want you all to memorize this. It's a game called Now I Got You, You Son of a Bitch. That's the name of the game. Now I got you, you son of a bitch. Okay. Where's this game played? 4-year-old is in the next room. A vase breaks. The parent is saying, Now I got you, you little son of a bitch. The kid comes in. The parent says, Did you break a vase? 4-year-old is terrified. No, 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 I did it. Walks. What's that? Well, that is uncommon, not uncommon with bad parents. And Byrne tries to impress how profoundly debilitating and destructive it is when a parent has knowledge, and instead of being upfront with the kid and saying, look, I know you broke a vase, not the worst thing in the world. Let's have another talk about running in the house. But instead, ambush the kid. It's humiliating. It's shame producing. It breaks the bonds of trust. And a parent who does that more than a couple of times, they in many ways have destroyed their bond with the child because the child won't trust them anymore. So I had a father come in one time. He said, I have a evil son. I said, what happened? I told him not to drive the car. I checked the mileage. I came home. There was, 1.2 miles on the car that wasn't there when I left. And I said, did you go to your friend's house? And he said, no. He says, you liar. And the father laid into the son. And the kid said, it was raining, and I know I'm not allowed to have a passenger in my car. I just got my license, but I took him home. But I ordered you not to drive the car. So they got into a huge fight. The kid's 16 and said, I'm moving out. Kid with some gumption. He said, I'm moving out. I don't want to live here anymore. This is horrible. I'm going to find somewhere else to live. He basically started couch surfing with, yeah, I don't know how he pulled it off, but yeah, he moved out, 16 years old. So the father comes in and he says, I don't know what to do. He's really bad. I don't want him in the house. But on the other hand, I don't know how to repair this. And I listened to it. Well, that was a case of, the game that I just named. And I, I try to slowly, I have to say to you, I know your son. I did his bar mitzvah. He's a good kid. I said, if you don't mind, that was a horrible, horrible moment of parenting. And he argued. He said, no, I caught him. He's bad. I, brought out Eric Byrne. I taught him. And I said, what you could have done is says, look, I came home. I noticed the mileage. I know you're a great kid. I know you don't intently just flaunt your parents' rules. You want to explain to me. Well, I took my friend home in the rain. You know what? That's kind of admirable of you, unless you would have got stopped. Getting your license would have been postponed. I know you're safe. I know you're a good driver. I've been in the car with you, but I just want to tell you, you got to think about unexpected consequences. No, I want to think about that alternative conversation. By the way, which Miral and I have had with our children, and you've heard me counsel many times for people to do this. Your child is not a ben sorer ou morer. Your child is not a stubborn and rebellious son where the solution is to metaphorically stone your child to death with your words and your games. What happened here, going back to my original theme tonight, is forces in the shadow that come out, especially when you feel self-righteous, especially when you feel you have a case against your spouse. I'm not heard. I'm not seen. I'm not understood. I've been dismissed. I have a case. I have a righteous case. Therefore, I will act as the arm of God's vengeance, and I will stone my spouse to death because they have violated the moral law. And they say horrible words, and then things calm down, and oftentimes that person who's the receiving end will never trust the other person again. There's always going to be some part that will hold back because they realize this other person is capable of vicious behavior. Unfortunately, I've seen it partly because my counseling practice is something like an emergency room, unless a person truly takes the lesson from our high holidays, which is great contrition and penance. Contrition meaning truly internalizing the hurt you've caused another, truly internalizing with one very important added practice. And that is to never say, what about? And never say, but there's context. If you are ever in a moment of contrition, people say, but I was drunk, or I was young, or was having a hard time at work. Uh, I just went into my first time going into our bank. I was really dreading it because I know what sometimes Israeli banks can be like. So I walk in, I'm standing there. I don't know where to go first. No one's paying attention to me. And so I see an employee with a tag walking around. I said, in Hebrew, I said, excuse me, my first time here, I don't know what my first step is. He goes, I don't know either. And he walks away. I said, okay, I was ready for that. So a customer said, well, you see that machine over there? You go there, you punch in your bank number, your identity card, and it gives you a number, and you go sit over there. I said, thank you very much. So I'm sitting there, and so it turned out the guy, he sat behind a desk of bank tellers. I think to myself, I don't want to talk to this guy. Being a little bit punitive, here's what I was planning. If they came and assigned me to him, I was going to say, I don't want to talk to him, right? I was going to be like super passive aggressive. And I had a few minutes to work myself through and said to myself, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be that customer. So I just took a deep breath, and lo and behold, he was my teller. And I sat down, and he started saying, "What can I help you?" I said, "I want to say something to you. You know, when I walked in the bank, do you remember that?" He said, "Yes." I said, he says, I really apologize. However, I was really busy and something was going on, and you saw me that I went to the panel and I was fixing, so I went to this whole, I'm sorry. However, and I listened, I said, Rak slicha, just slicha, forgiveness is a way of saying sorry. Slicha, I'm sorry. He goes, Ken, slicha, aval, and then he went on. I just sat there and said, Rak slicha, so pasuk. Just say, I'm sorry, with a period. He looked at me, he took a very deep breath, adjusted his collar. Anyway, I, I'm I'm really sorry. That was not right of me. I said, thank you, man. We're good. And we just went on with the business. So first of all, I'm so proud of myself. I did not do that passive aggressive ambush. I was so self-righteous and I wanted to, the manager said, why not? Well, I have a story. I I had a couple of minutes to become a better person. So there it was, out of my shadow. I get payback. I'm going to get vengeance. I'm going to embarrass him in front of his boss. And we had a nice moment. I said, okay, we're all good. Let's get to business. And I wonder if anybody had ever said to him, that was not polite. And then he said, however, and they got into an argument and things calmed down and he went. I don't know if any, because most people don't. Most people don't have a person who says, hey, it's all good. Just say I'm sorry with a period at the end, with a smile, with good cheer. With I've already forgiven you. There's just a formality we got to go through. It's called an apology. And I say, okay, and we go on. He's a young guy. I'm imagining all of this because I have so many people who just don't know how to say, I'm sorry, period, without context and excuses and explanations. That's what I want to say to all of you. If you've ever had one of these bad moments and you're saying to yourself, oh, I was so distraught, I had a bad time at work, and I'm dealing with so much stress, and that came out, it's not character, it's not my character. And that's all true until you're dealing with a wounded person. When you're dealing with a wounded person, you say, I owe you an apology. Say, okay, here's what I did. If you're interested in context, I'll give it to you. But the main thing is, I violated our relationship. I violated a moral norm. I said harsh things to you. I deeply apologize. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it into my daily practice because that's a very ugly side of me. And it's in me, but I don't want it out. So here's what I promise to you. I'm going to do daily work to work on that. And if you ever catch me coming near that, you rebuke me and I'll work on it. I will not give you context. I will not say sorry, but that's what you say. And then you have to do it. So the way we deal with our shadow proactively is do shadow work. Shadow work, things you've done, things you regret, forget your excuses, forget your explanations, go down and just do shadow work and realize shadow work is not getting rid of what's in the shadow. Shadow work is being aware of what's in the shadow, watching how quickly it can burst through, putting in the intervention mechanisms such as don't talk, take a breath, go to a script, and certainly apologizing. I have a nice little coda for all of this. So I'm teaching my philosophy class. And the Thursday nights we're doing Theory Thursdays, or doing the first few dialogues of the official canonical version of Plato's Socratic dialogues. First is the Euthyphro, and then we just did the Apology. And I sent the recording out, but we had a late registering student, and the student wrote me really funny. First says, Rabbi Finley, you owe me an apology. And I thought, that's funny. That's really, really fun. So I went, that was great. I said, I can resend it to you. He says, actually, you know what? I tried to put the password. I confused a zero with an O. It's all my fault. All is well on Mount Olympus. And I wrote, all is well on Mount Zion. We're good. And we went on. That was really funny. So you owe me an apology. Yeah, he didn't get the recording. And he turned out, I said, it was I didn't put in the right password. So I got a really big chuckle this week. And a nice moment with a student whom I don't know well, but felt free enough to kid with me. And we kidded back. So anyway, so just think of that. The more you banter, the more you kid, the more you have humor. Take responsibility for your actions. Apologize sincerely, with people that you're close to, with your children. No ambushes. One thing I want to do with high holidays is as I've said before, we just can't do all the music this year. So I'm just going to talk our way through. And one thing I do want to do is do an extended session on Eric Burns' Games People Play. It's a brilliant book. It will change your life because you will see the games. You'll say, that is I. I do that. And Burns says, if you can intervene against the games, you've changed. Remember, he used to be a psychoanalyst. He says, just change your games. Your brain will do all the work. When you change your games, the brain will do the transforming. All right, that's my introduction to the theme of this Shabbat for me, which is shadow work, and I'll take this further tomorrow.